Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode of the award-winning Hill Country Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me fellow Hill Country Youth Orchestras board member Greg Shrader. Greg, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
Greg, we do have one other thing in common, which was you ran the Bryan Eagle.
I didn't rent it. I worked there for a while.
And I grew up in the cultural center of Megalopolis of Central Texas myself. So,
Gotcha.
although back then it was the Bryan Daly Eagle.
Yep.
But we're here to talk about one of our joint loves, and that's the Hill Country Youth Orchestras and our fall major fundraiser, our High Tea. So could you, for our audience who has not been to or heard of our High Tea, could you describe what it is?
Certainly. Tom, for 14 years, Robert Earl Keen was a great benefactor for the youth orchestra, and he presented a concert each year that was our major fundraiser. When he retired 5 years ago now, we had to come up with another event to try to replace some of that money because we're a 501c3. We support about 150 students a year, and it takes us about $250,000 to run our program. So we came up with the idea to have a high tea, and that is Blossom has become the signature event of the youth orchestra. And this year it's going to be December the 6th at the Museum of Western Art. This will be the third year in a row for us there at that venue. And Daryl Beauchamp has done a great job being our host. He opens the museum up for us. He closes it down, and we just have a great time. And the event keeps getting bigger and bigger. We sold out the last 3 years and expect to sell out again this year.
I have a great love for this event for a unique reason. We moved to Kerrville in April of 2021, and the first high tea was that June. And my English wife saw an ad in the paper. She said, "Oh, there's a high tea. Let's go."
Yeah.
And that was my introduction to the Hill Country Youth Orchestras. But for those who may not be married to an English girl, can you explain what a high tea is?
A high tea is a gathering of like-minded women that are interested, and men too, that are interested in socializing around having high tea, scones, and just a very nice, probably I would say it's a little higher than semi-formal. We encourage people to dress. The ladies, most of them wear hats because it's a place for them to put on their finery and come and socialize in a very cultured environment with tea and scones.
You say cultured, but one of the highlights of the event is bingo.
Absolutely.
And I know that because at our first event, on the first bingo game, my wife won, and they said, "Oh, Mrs. Fox."
Yep.
And she looked at me and she said, "Is your mother here?"
Exactly.
But everyone is in a lovely hat, and they can be wide brim, they can be narrow, they can be flappers. I've seen all styles there. The bingo is certainly a lot of fun, but there's a clear emphasis on music.
Absolutely.
When you walk in, we have musicians from the Hill Country Youth Orchestras playing, and then I've seen actually some soloists play while we're seated at our tables, and they talk about their experience. Could you share a little bit about the music part?
The music part. Hill Country Youth Orchestra, most of you that have listened to Tom know that we were founded in 1987 when a young girl asked her mother if she could play the cello. And at that time, there was no real place to get stringed instrument instruction in Kerrville. So that was the genesis of the program. And since then, it's grown. I think we have probably 23 or 2,400 alumnus now. And it is basically a program designed to introduce children in grades K through 12 to the orchestra experience. We offer string musical instruction, string musical instrument instruction. Excuse me, Tom, that's a mouthful. Both the fall and spring semesters. Any student in grades K through 12 is welcome. They don't have to have any ability. We have right now in Kerrville, we have 6 different orchestras based on performance ability. In Bernie, which we have expanded the program up there, we have 5 different orchestras up there. So any child that's interested in learning how to play the violin, the viola, the cello, the bass, any stringed instrument is welcome. In the spring, then that's when the percussion and brass from the local high schools join it. And then we have a real orchestra for our spring concerts.
The success of the program and the success of the Hill Country Youth Orchestras is certainly measured in the number of students who go through our program, but we've had some real successes in people getting scholarships to pursue music professionally. Could you talk about maybe those that might go on to college and how the Hill Country Youth Orchestras have impacted them, but also how they give back to us?
That first young girl, she teaches music at a small private school in Indiana. She's on the faculty there. She is on the tenure track. We have 2 students that are going to Interlochen on scholarship this summer, and the Interlochen is the place for aspiring musicians. It rivals Juilliard School of Music. We've had students at Juilliard. We've got people that are going to scholarships at Texas universities to play in the orchestra, and it's a good program.
We mentioned the hats and maybe too much in passing because I want to go back to that. There's not a lot of opportunities in Kerrville for women to wear hats other than cowboy hats.
Right.
And we have lots of charity events here, and certainly nice dress is appropriate, and many times hats are appropriate, but they're typically cowboy hats. And I absolutely adore seeing women in hats. It reminds me of my grandmother and my mother when I was growing up. But it turns out, at least in my wife's case, she loves wearing a hat every once in a while. So could you maybe talk about how you and your wife feel about the hat part of what we do?
The first time we really experienced any type of high tea, my wife and I had the opportunity to visit the Vancouver, British Columbia back in the late 80s. And we went into the Empress Hotel there on Victoria Island about 4:00 in the afternoon. And there was a gentleman that was ringing a bell, and he was calling people for the high tea. And all of a sudden we looked up, and here's all these ladies with hats and more hats just parading in to have high tea at the Empress Hotel. And it was quite the show. And we were just a couple of bumpkins from East Texas at that time, and we had no idea what high tea was all about. I think my wife had watched My Fair Lady a couple of times, so she kind of had a clue. But it was quite the experience to see how the women got together and socialized in a very genteel fashion there at the Empress Hotel. And so to try to replicate that in Kerrville is really quite fun, and it's something that has really become a signature event for the youth orchestra in Kerrville.
I'd also like to say a few words about the venue, because we've had other venues, but we are now, in my mind, one of the top attractions in Kerrville, which is the Museum of Western Art. And to sit in the main, it's not a ballroom, but the main room for our event, I'm just inspired by the art and the sound. Can you say a few words about what the museum might mean to you and your wife, and how much you enjoy being in that venue for our high tea event?
Certainly. My wife and I first visited the Museum of Western Art back in, I'm thinking, probably 1986 or 87. We were living in Abilene at the time, and we made a visit to Kerrville, and one of the things we wanted to see was the Museum of Western Art. And we're just blown away by not only what was in the museum, but the whole museum itself, the way it was structured, the architecture. The mesquite wood parquet floors are just second to none. My wife still drools about that everywhere we go. And to see the art there and represent it, and see then when I moved here in 95 and saw how much people cared about the Museum of Western Art here in Kerrville, how many people supported it, and it was really a nice venue. One of the keynotes of the Hill Country, and really a great asset to Kerrville. It's a fantastic facility. And Daryl Beauchamp, hats off to him for really opening it up to the youth orchestra.
And Daryl always gets to say a few words and talks about maybe the current exhibit, which if you've ever heard Daryl talk, he can talk a lot, but he can talk about art forever. And so I always really enjoy his remarks, but also just the atmosphere of, my parents were teachers. And what drew me to the Hill Country Youth Orchestras was the educational component. As you already mentioned, K through 12. What does that really mean to you to be able to see that level of student have a professional bringing training for stringed instruments literally into small towns in Central Texas?
It's quite gratifying. My wife, she's been involved with youth orchestra longer than I have, probably since 1997 or 98. She actually worked. She was a coordinator for youth orchestra for many years. And to see a 6-year-old child with a quarter-size violin that's about 18 inches long, and to see their eyes light up when they learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, pretty gratifying. And then to see the progression Our top orchestras are second to none as far as youth orchestras go. And it's just a great experience. It's something that Kerrville's fortunate to have a great cultural community, the Symphony of the Hills, and the Hill Country Youth Orchestra plays right into that.
Absolutely. Greg, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if any of our listeners wanted to find out more about the Hill Country Youth Orchestras, about our high tea, what might be the best place for them to go?
Best place to go is HCYO.org, our website. And certainly you can email me at development@hcyo.org, just development at hcyo.org. I'll get you all the information you can. Tickets are going fast. It's going to be a great event, and it supports the youth orchestra.
Well, Greg, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me on this topic, and I'm greatly looking forward to this year's event.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.